Well, if you'd like to return to Deuteronomy, this time to chapter 2. Apparently some of you have been noticing my tremor, my shake, and you've been asking about it. Is it the fear of 200 to 300 torchbearers that causes me to shake like this? Well, I'm sure there is a genuine fear of 200 or 300 torchbearers, but that's not the cause. I apparently came shaking out of my mother's womb. I have had this all my life, and it's known as a benign tremor. So nothing to worry about, but thanks for asking. I was once at a very highly charismatic Anglican church. Don't know how I get to these places, but I did. And it was one of these very tall, high pulpits. You kind of get vertigo when you go and stand in the pulpit. And I was a bit ticked off that morning because they'd been serving church coffee beforehand. And it was terrible coffee. And not many things tick me off, but bad coffee ticks me off. So I wasn't feeling very good. Preached my heart out. And I was just about to come down from this pulpit. I closed in prayer. And I saw a guy waiting for me. You know these people who wait for you after you've preached? They pounce on you? He was one of them. I could tell a mile away. So as I was coming down the steps, I said to the Lord, Lord, I know you want to work through me, but can I handle this guy on my own, please? So I got down to the floor, and he threw his arms around me, embraced me. He said, that was wonderful. That was wonderful. It's so obvious you're completely filled with the Spirit. So I said, how do you know I'm filled with the Spirit? Bad coffee, you see. How do you know I'm filled with the Spirit? He said, you're shaking all over as you preach. I said, it's a disease. He had to go and check his theology very, very quickly. Deuteronomy chapter 2. That was the introduction. Verse 1. Then we turned back and set out towards the wilderness along the route to the Red Sea, as the Lord had directed me. For a long time we made our way around the hill country of Seir. Then the Lord said to me, you have made your way around this hill country long enough. Now turn north. Give the people these orders. You're about to pass through the territory of your relatives, the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir. They will be afraid of you, but be very careful. Do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. I've given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own. You're to pay them in silver for the food you eat and the water you drink. And then just a few verses in chapter 7, verse 1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are to enter, to possess, and drives out before you many nations, then he mentions the 7 nations which are larger and stronger than Israel. Verse 2, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you, and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. Verse 17. You may say to yourselves, these nations are stronger than we are. How can we drive them out? But do not be afraid of them. Remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt. You saw with your own eyes the great trials, the signs and wonders, the mighty hand and outstretched arm with which the Lord your God brought you out. The Lord your God will do the same to all the peoples you now fear. One of the tasks of leadership is to define reality. To define for the people you are leading the task that God has given them to do, the possibilities that they have as they embark on that task, the difficulties they are likely to face, and the resources at their disposal. It's a vital task of leadership, defining reality for the people you are leading. So what was the reality for the children of Israel as they stood at the entrance to the land of Canaan, the land God had said they would possess? Well, chapter 7 and verse 1, when the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, to drive out before you many nations, 7 nations, larger and stronger than you. This was an uneven contest. 7 nations, larger and stronger than Israel. Egypt may have been a nightmare, but it was far, far safer than this. Moses, of course, great leader, anticipates the problem. Verse 17, you may say to yourselves, these nations are stronger than we are. How can we drive them out, you might say. Back in chapter 1, Moses had reminded the people of how their forefathers responded to the intelligence received from the spies when they returned from the hill country of the Amorites. Their fathers, Moses reminded them, had rebelled against the Lord. They were grumbling in their tents. And this was their conclusion as those spies returned. Verse 27, the Lord hates us. So he brought us out of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. As once again, the children of Israel stand at the entrance to Canaan, is it going to be a case of déjà vu? Would they once again fall and fail through sinful unbelief at their moment of opportunity? Well, why had they failed on the first occasion? They failed because of their view of reality. The intelligence report had been clear. The people are stronger, they're taller, their cities are large, the walls of the city are up to the sky. Really? And just to add a twist, we even saw the Anakites there. This quite probably exaggerated picture of the situation was the only reality they had accepted. What they could see with their eyes was their only reality. The urgent leadership challenge for Moses is to define the true reality for the people of God as they stand once again on the border of their land. And in order to do that, Moses has to renew their vision of the God they are worshipping and serving. He has to renew their understanding of God's purpose for them. And that's what this great sermon, which is the book of Deuteronomy, is all about. Moses, at this critical time, this critical moment in the history of the nation, gives in this book a magnificent exposition of the character of God and of the certainty of his purpose. And this will change everything for the children of Israel. Look again at verse 17, chapter 7. You may say to yourselves, these nations are stronger than we are. How can we drive them out? But, says Moses, don't be afraid of them. Remember well what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt. You saw with your own eyes the great trials, the signs, the wonders, the mighty hand, the outstretched arm with which the Lord your God brought you out. The Lord your God, Moses says, will do the same to all the peoples you now fear. It was true. These nations were larger and they were far stronger. But there was a greater truth. The true reality was the almighty sovereign power of their God. And the question was, were they going to take that into account? Were they going to respond to what they could see in front of them? 7 large nations, walled cities, Anakites, 7 or 8 foot high. Were they going to respond just to what they could see with their eyes. Go back again to their previous failure. The intelligence reports they had received left them with a very simple choice. You recall that the main intelligence report was not signed off by the whole team. Here's the majority view, Numbers 13. They reported to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us. It does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful. The cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. But there was a minority report, and you read it in verse 30. Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up, take possession of the land. We can certainly do it." But it seems Caleb could hardly get a word in edgeways. You read about it in Numbers 13, verse 31. This is what we're told. The men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people there are of great size." All of them now, not just the Anakites. All the people are of great size. We saw the Nephilim, descendants of Anak, come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. It's a stark choice, isn't it? A stark choice for the people. Caleb, his report, or the rest, the majority report. What are you going to believe? What are you going to see at this moment in history? Well, we know the result. The majority saw the fortified cities. Everyone in the land appeared above 6 foot, and that's without mentioning the Nephilim. This country devours people. In comparison with this, we see ourselves as grasshoppers. It's called the grasshopper mentality. The problems are so big. Our fears are so great. We feel so small in comparison to the problems. It's an uneven contest, and paralysis sets in. Do you know, Caleb had a bigger fear, a far bigger fear, than those who brought the majority report. But nothing he'd seen in the land worried him. His fear was very different. You can read about it in Numbers 14, verse 6. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes, and they said to the entire assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey. He'll give it to us, only do not rebel against the Lord. Don't be afraid of them, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us, so don't be afraid of them." You see Caleb's fear? We must not displease the Lord. We must not rebel against him. And what a different perspective this gave to Caleb. There's no grasshopper mentality with Caleb. The majority said the land we explored devours those living in it. Caleb's perspective, don't be afraid of them, we'll swallow them up. What a different perspective. In life, in ministry, in leadership, it so often comes down to the question, what do you see? Which reality motivates your action? The reality of what you're looking at without God, or what you're looking at, problems just as real, but with God on your side fully in the picture. Some of the most liberating and challenging verses for me in the whole of Scripture are found at the end of 2 Corinthians chapter 4. It's a chapter where Paul has been talking about his challenges, how he's hard-pressed on every side, but he's not crushed. He's perplexed, but he's not abandoned. He's struck down, but he's not destroyed. What does Paul choose to see in those circumstances? Well, listen to verse 18. We fix our eyes not on what is seen. Whether what we can see is good or bad or indifferent, we don't fix our eyes on that. We're not going to concentrate on that. We don't fix our eyes on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen, good, bad, or indifferent, is always temporary. But what is unseen, the true reality, is eternal. I've had 35, 40 years of leading a mission with about 7,000 workers. And sometimes felt very, very overwhelmed by problems and by my fears in the midst of those problems. And tragically, from time to time, that became all I could see. All I could see was the problem. All I could feel was my fears. But there was a reality that tragically I often failed to see. The eternal God was by my side. And as you know, Caleb was not just a man of words. His actions were consistent with his words. Later in the book of Joshua, we arrive at the point where Joshua is dividing the land. He's allocating to various tribes their inheritance in the land. And that section in Joshua begins in chapter 14 with Caleb and the men of Judah approaching Joshua, reminding him of the promise Moses had made to him after his courageous report when he spied out the land. Now listen to Caleb. And if this doesn't stir you, as I said earlier, you're not jet-lagged, you're dead. If this doesn't stir you, listen to Caleb. Now then, just as the Lord has promised, he's kept me alive for 45 years, since the time he said this to Moses, 45 years traveling around a desert. So, here I am today, 85 years old. I'm as strong as the day Moses sent me out, just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now then, give me this hill country that the Lord promised to me on that day. You yourself heard that the Anakites are there. This is where the cities are large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I'll drive them out. Now, it was exactly the fortified cities and the Anakites which had put terror into the hearts of the people. But those same things appear to be the motivation for this 85-year-old to move forward. And it's all because of what he sees. Oh, he saw the cities. He's not minimizing the problem. He saw the giants, but his eyes are fixed somewhere else. His eyes are on the fulfillment of the promise. Give me this hill country that the Lord promised me on that day. Now, you got this brilliant testimony at the beginning of this section in the book of Joshua, but at the end of the section, you've got a very different story. It's Joseph's tribes. Joshua chapter 17, verse 14. The people of Joseph said to Joshua, "Why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for our inheritance? We're a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly." So Joshua says, if you're so numerous, go up to the forest and clear land for yourselves. But they respond, that's not enough for us. And all the Canaanites who live in the plain, they've got iron chariots, both in Bethshan and in the settlements and in the valley of Jezreel. What a contrast. Here's a numerous people paralyzed by what they see. Iron chariots. And an 85-year-old facing fortified cities and the Anakites, but galvanized because he sees by faith the fulfillment of promise made 45 years before. And who was right? The faith-filled Caleb or the dithering tribes of Joseph? Well, the magnificent testimony to God's faithfulness and power at the close of Joshua 21 provides the answer. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he'd sworn to give to their forefathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. Not one word of all the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. Later, of course, in the history of Israel, David would be another magnificent example of what I'm talking about. He sees Goliath defying the armies of Israel. What's the reality here? Well, as King Saul said, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're little more than a boy. He's been a warrior from his youth. That's the reality. It's obvious. End of story. But David has a history that questions that view of reality. David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he's defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paws of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Notice that our history, our experience, personally and as a movement, should impact our view of reality. What David had experienced in the past impacted his understanding of reality at that critical moment. Not so with Israel. All the history of God's dealing with them, his interventions on their behalf, is completely discounted as Israel looks across the Jordan at these 7 larger cities, and they're paralyzed into inaction. How utterly tragic. Goliath, of course, also had a view of reality, a view which would cost him his head. He looked David over, saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said, I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. That's what Goliath saw. A mere boy, a pathetic sling, just a few stones. He's a fully armed, trained, giant warrior. Now listen to David's perspective. Listen to his view of reality. You come against me, Goliath, with sword and with spear and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day, the Lord will deliver you into a boy's hands. David saw the strength of the God of the angel armies, as Eugene Peterson paraphrases it. He saw things which Goliath could not see. How often, brothers, sisters, fellow leaders, how often are we constrained by the reality of what we see with our eyes? We need to learn to open the eyes of our heart, as Paul puts it, the eye of faith, to see the God of the angel armies by our side. It's these realities, as well as the realities of the problems, that we must take into account in all our decision-making. A missionary was on furlough in the US, speaking to his home church. Back on the mission field, one of his jobs was to go to the bank in a nearby town to collect the salaries to be given to the workers in the mission health clinic. One particular month, as he traveled back from the bank carrying the money, he witnessed a fight taking place in the street. He intervened, gave some help to an injured man, had the opportunity actually to speak to him about Jesus as well, and then went on his way. The following month, the man he'd cared for met him and told him how a gang, the gang who had attacked him, followed the missionary, intending to kill him and steal the cash. But they didn't, because when they caught up with him, they saw he was surrounded by 26 security guards. He laughed, explaining, "I was certainly on my own." At that point, as he made his report, a man in the congregation stood up and asked the date when the incident happened. The missionary gave the date, and this now highly animated man explained, "That same morning, brother, I'd been going to play golf, but I felt the urge to pray for you. The urge was so strong, I abandoned my golf plans completely. I phoned various people from the church to come to an urgent prayer meeting at the church. 26 people came." When did you last attend a prayer meeting with that sense of expectancy in your heart? Do we really see reality? Or are our eyes just fixed on what we can see? We don't take into account the God of the angel armies who is by our side. So the leadership task of Moses is to define reality as the people face the move into the promised land, to remind them of the reality of the God they're worshipping. Let's see how he does that. I don't know how far we'll be able to get with this, but let's see how he does this. Look at chapter 2 and verse 1. "Then we turned back and set out towards the wilderness." He reminds them of how previously they'd been on the verge of the promised land, only to turn back and set out towards the wilderness. Not only literally, but spiritually, their unbelief caused them to turn towards the wilderness. And dreadful years followed. A generation passed away. As Raymond Brown puts it, every funeral was a renewed testimony to the seriousness of their sin. But then, the wonderful words of verse 2. "Then the Lord said to me, 'You've made your way around this hill country long enough. Now turn north.'" Finally, after 40 years, turn towards the promised land. What's Moses preaching here? He's preaching the immense mercy, the incredible patience and love of God for his covenant people. They concluded, remember, the Lord hates us. Moses is saying, no, that's a lie of the devil. You may be a rebellious, unbelieving people, but you're still his people, and the land is still yours to possess. The covenant is unbreakable. Moses was preaching hope based on the unchanging character of God. And so often, the task of the leader is to declare hope in difficult situations. And once again, it depends on your view of reality. The leader walking with God knows there is always, always hope. Why? because he knows he's serving the God of resurrection. He's serving the God of redemption. He's serving the God who disciplines, yes, but will never abandon his covenant people. Just have a quick look into chapter 10. Moses, in his anger, has smashed the stones on which the law of God had been inscribed by the hand of God. Then read the story in verse 1, chapter 10. At that time the Lord said to me, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and come up to me on the mountain, also make a wooden chest. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Then you're to put them in the chest. So I made the ark out of acacia wood and chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones. Verse 4, the Lord wrote on these tablets what he had written before. Those repeated words, like the first ones, and the fact that he was going to write what he had previously written are, as Raymond Brown puts it, a striking reminder of God's generous pardon. They instruct us that our God is the God of the second opportunity. And many of us, certainly myself, would say he's the God of the third opportunity, and the fourth, and the fifth, and keep counting. So he challenges them, chapter 2 and verse 7. The Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He's watched over your journey through this vast wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, and you haven't lacked anything. He's saying, this is the God you worship. He's going before you into the land. Even in the wilderness, he never abandoned you. He provided for you for 40 years in a desert, and you never lacked a thing. I don't know whether you've ever thought about that. It's utterly incredible. It's surely one of the most amazing stories of human history. How the Lord provided for this vast army of people for 40 years of trekking in a desert. According to Exodus chapter 12, there were 600,000 men who left Egypt in the Exodus. The total number of people who made that 40-year wilderness trek, it's estimated, was anywhere between 3 and 5 million. And they lacked nothing. Chapter 29, verses 5 and 6. During the 40 years that I led you through the wilderness, your clothes didn't wear out, nor did your sandals on your feet. You ate no bread, you drank no wine. I did this so that you might know that I am the Lord your God. They had enough money to pay for food and drink as they passed through Edom, as you can see in verse 6, and Heshbon, verse 28. And of course, when necessary, the Lord would rain down manna from heaven to meet their needs. Moses is saying, look, you've got a history. However tough the challenge ahead might seem, you know the God who has walked with you and is walking with you and will walk with you right into the land. So were those wilderness years wasted years? Later the prophets would say, no, they weren't wasted years. Jeremiah and Hosea would later suggest that those years in the desert were far from wasted. They believed that during those years, a new generation renewed their love for God. God said to Jeremiah, go and proclaim in the hearing of Jerusalem, I remember the devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the desert, through a land not your own. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruits of the harvest. Oh, you rebelled in the desert, you grumbled in the wilderness, but you continued to follow me. You followed the cloud, you followed the fire. And if you read chapter 8, you'll be told that God was humbling, disciplining his people as they trekked in the desert, so that in the end it might go well with them. And again, that's a great privilege of leadership. Even at the toughest of times, to say to those you're leading, remember your history. Remember how God has been with us. Is he going to abandon us now? He's with you. And even in the problems, the crises, he's working for your ultimate good. As I look back to 60 years of walking with Jesus, I can honestly say that the toughest times have been the most essential times. I can honestly say that. I've learned more of God in the desert than I have on the mountaintop. Tough, but beautiful. Remember the God who has been with you. Let me just say one more thing, and then I'll close. So God has shown them his mercy, God has shown them his love. And then he shows them another essential characteristic, which was crucial to them as they moved into the land. Have a look at chapter 2, verses 3 to 5, just have a quick look over them, and then verses 9 to 23. And you're going to see here the sovereignty of God. Verse 4, you're about to pass through the territory of your brothers, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir. They'll be afraid of you, but be very careful. Don't provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even to put your feet on. I've given Esau the hill country of Seir. And then in verses 9 to 23, if you skim over it, Moses reminds them of how God had given him similar instructions concerning other lands which God had given to other peoples. What is Moses doing by reminding them of this? He's showing them that God is not only interested in his chosen people. He's even working on behalf of peoples who have absolutely no interest in him. It's interesting that in chapter 2 and verse 21, Moses says, the Lord destroyed the Zamzumites from before the Ammonites, who drove them out and settled in their place. Now, the Ammonites were descended from Lot. They were considered to be relatives of the Israelites, and the Lord was subduing people on their behalf. As Abraham stated, our God is the judge of all the earth. Paul, before the Athenians, made this extraordinary statement. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he doesn't live in temples built by hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they would live. Wow. Paul gives the Athenians a crash course in basic theology, which we haven't time to look at. But notice that sentence. He determined the times set for the nations, the exact places where they should live. He's referring to the nations of the world, and he's saying both the history and the geography of each nation are ultimately under God's sovereign control. You're about to move forward into the land. You've many fears. Yes, these nations appear larger and stronger, but remember your history. And remember that I am the sovereign Lord. Not only responsible for the existence of you as a nation, every nation is ultimately under my control. So I want you to move forward. I want you to bypass some nations, and I want you to be my instrument of judgment in others. I have to say that the doctrine of the sovereignty of God has been absolutely crucial in my Christian life and leadership. As I've said over the years, there have been many distressing situations, many difficult situations. And if I did not believe at such times that God was ultimately in sovereign control of these situations, I wouldn't sleep at night. But normally, I've slept well. Because I believe God is the sovereign. It's his work. It's his work. What a privilege to come alongside and be part of that work for a time. And if I do my best as I come alongside, then I can sleep at night, because it's not mine. Torchbearers isn't yours. It's his. It's his. And he's the sovereign. What's your view of reality? What view of reality are you going to take back to your centers? Just what you can see? Or do you really believe? Do you really believe that the God of the angel armies is at your side? It turns on its head your view of reality.